The street lay in shadow, echoing only with the harsh gasps of a man in panic. His blonde hair glinted under the occasional flicker of streetlights as he darted through a narrow alley, muttering that he should have known better. Skidding to a halt, he spun around, scanning the shadows. The silence behind him brought a brief sigh of relief. Just as he whispered to himself that he was in the clear, a blade pressed cold against his throat. Without a sound, his pursuer had closed in, delivering swift retribution before he could react. At the far end of the alley, pedestrians passed unaware, while the blonde man, trembling, offered all the cash he had in exchange for his life. His voice wavered, but the answer came sharp and final. The pursuer gave no room for bargaining. The matter was settled in one silent stroke. Elsewhere, under the calm of early daylight, Kai, a 17-year-old student at Kagura High, strolled down the sidewalk with a sluggish yawn. He muttered that he was too tired for school and attending right, after a night job was pushing it. His tousled brunette hair framed a weary face as he trudged forward. Going home wasn't an option anymore. The school loomed just ahead. Within the classroom, students had already gathered. Kai shuffled through the doorway, barely lifting his eyes as a few heads turned his way. Without greeting anyone, he slumped into his chair. Mido Shuji, the upbeat class president and a member of the soccer club, greeted him with a friendly smile. Kai barely acknowledged him, resting his head on folded arms. Mido hesitated, his hand still raised mid-greeting, while a pink-haired girl named Naga Rhea clicked her tongue in annoyance. She complained that Kai was being his usual cold self. Turning to Mido, she asked why he even bothered trying. Mido replied that Kai was still their classmate, no matter how distant. Noticing Kai was already asleep, Naga rolled her eyes, calling him tactless. The door creaked open again as a tall, brown-haired guy walked in, his ears glinting with multiple piercings. Naga glanced toward him and groaned, muttering that the situation had just gone from bad to worse. The newcomer was Arashi Shanuk, the Afai notorious local gang leader. Two students immediately rose and greeted him in unison. Arashi smiled back and began scanning the room. Spotting Kai asleep at his desk, Arashi strolled over, calling out to him loudly. Kai didn't budge. Annoyed, Arashi warned that ignoring him wasn't wise. Still, Kai didn't stir. Finally, Arashi reached toward him, but before his hand got close, it was caught mid-air. Arashi's eyes widened in confusion. Kai lifted his head slowly, violet eyes staring up drowsily as he asked what Arashi wanted. Arashi growled, demanding that Kai release him. For a second, Kai seemed lost in thought. Then, with a quiet apology, he let go. Arashi yanked his hand back, rubbing it and muttering that Kai was a freak. Before the tension could spike again, a sharp voice demanded quiet. A girl with flowing blonde hair and bright green eyes, Kaki Ren, stood up, clearly unimpressed. Arashi sneered, asking if she intended to act tough too. But before he could advance, a tall girl with dark hair tied in a high ponytail stepped between them. This was Hashimoto Meyer, a member of the school's disciplinary committee. She coolly instructed Arashi to behave before he violated more rules. Etiai, that, a laid-back voice chimed in. Narumi Rihea, a pierced blonde lounging nearby, mocked Meyer's efforts, claiming no one cared about her scolding. Choosing not to get involved, Kai laid his head down again. Arashi seethed, but dropped into a seat, throwing his legs up onto the desk. The room settled. Kaki exhaled and buried herself in her textbook. Mirei continued bickering with Narumi. Mido chatted with Naga. This was Kagura High's Class 2A, where chaos was routine. Kai didn't give it much thought, retreating inward. But just as he began to drift, a prickling sensation jolted him. Something was wrong. His eyes opened, focusing on the floor beneath Mido. A dark spot shimmered, slowly expanding until it formed a glowing pentagram. Brilliant light spread, causing panic to ripple through the room. Terrified students stared at the floor, unsure what to do. Some rose from their seats, others froze in place. Mito demanded answers but quickly realized now wasn't the time, as class president, he instructed everyone to evacuate the room. But Kai remained seated. He understood escape was no longer an option. The glow intensified, enveloping the classroom in blinding light. One by one, students collapsed and vanished from sight. When Kai came to, he was sprawled in a grand stone hall flanked by towering columns. He sat up, surveying the unfamiliar space. There was only one conclusion. The light had transported them somewhere else. Gradually, the others began waking. Naga looked around in shock, asking what the white light had been. Mito urged everyone to remain calm and asked if anyone was hurt. Kai watched with quiet respect. Mito had a knack for keeping people grounded. Arashi, however, was less cooperative. He sneered at the idea of staying put and motioned to leave. Kai stepped in, asking him to hold on. Arashi turned, annoyed, but paused when Kai mentioned hearing approaching footsteps. A hush fell. Everyone turned toward the looming double doors. Kai focused on the sound. 2 sets of steps, one light, one heavy. The doors swung open. A man with silver hair and a regal beard entered, flanked by a young woman with flowing white hair. She smiled gently, praising their composure and calling them hero candidates. The students were dumbfounded. The pair looked like they stepped out of a fantasy tale, like a knight and princess. Kai, hiding behind a column, studied them. They weren't cosplayers. There was an intensity in the air too real to fake. As he examined the girl, he thought, she wasn't as impressive as everyone seemed to think. The girl introduced herself as Leonora, Archbishop of the Sacred Nation of Digest. The man beside her, she said, was her knight. Arashi pointed accusingly, calling her speech delusional. Unfazed, Leonora said she understood their confusion. Mito stepped forward, politely explaining that none of them knew how they got here, and asked for an explanation. Leonora assured them that's why she had come. Without stalling, she delivered the truth. They had been summoned to another world to serve as humanity's last hope, warriors destined to defeat the Demon King. The class was stunned. Mito struggled to believe it. Arashi exploded, still dismissing. It all is nonsense. The knight's face darkened, ordering Arashi to show respect. Arashi barked back, threatening him. The knight stepped forward, ready to strike. Leonora urged him to stop, but the knight insisted it was necessary to put the boy in his place. Kai, still behind the pillar, watched as Arashi charged the armored man. He admired the guy's nerve, running headfirst into a sword fight. Arashi's mind raced. He'd fought armed thugs before, dodged the first blow, hit low, but the knight was prepared. A sudden flash cut the air. Blood trickled from Arashi's forehead. The knight asked if he was still feeling brave. Silence fell. None of the students had even seen the sword move. Leonora sighed and asked her knight to stand down. She turned back to the stunned students, apologizing for the rough welcome. She promised that no harm would come to them and said she owed them a complete explanation. Every detail would be revealed. But first, she asked for silence. Leonora stood before them, her expression somber as she spoke of a world in ruin. Humanity, she explained, was crumbling under the onslaught of the Demon King's forces. Across the land, countries had fallen, and only their sacred nation of Digest still clung to resistance, but even that resistance was fraying. Despite their desperate efforts, they couldn't completely fend off the invaders. In the shadows cast by a massive stone pillar, Shinjo leaned against the cold surface, half listening. The tale of a demon king threatening humanity? It sounded too familiar, almost cliched. Yet this was no bedtime story. These students, children really, were chosen as candidates for salvation. They were the last hope of an entire world. Midito's voice trembled as he posed a question none wanted. to voice aloud. "You mean we have to fight him?" Narumi scoffed, saying it was impossible. Hashimoto echoed the sentiment, reminding them all that none of them had even been in a fight before. The girl who had spoken earlier turned around, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Not everyone," she said, "was made to endure such a situation." Hashimoto glanced at one of his classmates. She was weeping, pleading to be sent back to her own world. But the knight stepped forward, his tone resolute. He told them plainly, this wasn't a choice. No matter how absurd or cruel it sounded, they had to fight. Defeating the Demon King was the only key to returning home. His words struck the students like a blow. Fear rippled through the group. Doubt, disbelief. Shinjo couldn't tell if the knight was sincere or simply trying to frighten them into compliance. Either way, the logic tracked. If this was real, then preparing for the worst was the only sane option. But how could ordinary kids, used to games and gossip, be expected to kill? Combat wasn't about enthusiasm, it was about training, experience, and a certain cold resilience. Arashi let out a derisive laugh. His expression twisted into a smirk as he took a step forward. "You brought us here to save your world," he said sharply. "But you don't care what we think, do you?" His glare landed squarely on the knight. "You expect us to nod along and obey like good little soldiers?" The tension crackled. Arashi's defiance set him apart. The knight studied him silently. That spark, fury mixed with potential, was dangerous. He was a threat, the kind that couldn't be ignored. The knight reached for his weapon. Before steel could meet air, Leonora stepped between them. Her hand touched Arashi's cheek, a soft glow enveloping him. The wound on his forehead faded, like a bad dream. Her voice carried sorrow. She apologized to the boys, not as a leader, but as someone who shared in their guilt. The light surrounding her drifted toward Arashi, and Nagashi, watching nearby, asked what it was. Leonora explained it was a power granted by their deity, Digress, a divine force capable of rewriting the rules of the world, if only for a moment. She turned to the children, noting their confusion. "Magic," she told them. In their world, it was called magic. The ease with which she said it made Shinjo's thoughts race. These people knew too much about their culture. This wasn't the first time they'd summoned others. It couldn't be. Leonora moved toward Midito next. She raised her glowing hand to his brow. "Magic is the reason you're here," she said, softly. As her fingers brushed his skin, a pulse of energy surged through him. He shuddered. Moments later, his hands glowed with brilliant light. Nagashi shielded her eyes from the sudden flare. From that glow, a sword emerged. Its blade pulsed blue, humming with energy. Leonora explained that her power could awaken the blessings slumbering in each of them. Gifts meant only for heroes. The ability granted wasn't hers to choose. It came of its own will, without rhyme or reason. She bowed her head. Their mission was selfish, but she asked for their help nonetheless.